The silence in my apartment usually soothed me, but tonight it felt like a suffocating blanket. 15 years. 15 years I'd scrubbed his name from my memory, tried to bury him so deep I'd never have to feel the sting of his presence again. And now, this. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table, the sound sharp and jarring in the quiet. I knew who it was before I even looked. It was a message I'd been dreading, one that crawled out of the shadows I thought I'd escaped. Unknown number. My stomach clenched, a familiar nausea rising. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, shatter it into a million pieces and pretend this wasn't happening. But I knew I couldn't. He was already under my skin, a parasite injecting its venom. Hesitantly, the first picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. The message was short, brutal in its simplicity. Been thinking about the past. I'd like to reconnect. I've changed. Gavin. Just the name echoed in my head, a painful echo of a life I desperately tried to forget. He had no right. No right to dredge up the past, to act like he could just waltz back into my life after what he'd done. I stared at the message, frozen, my breath hitched in my chest. I hadn't thought about him in years, and suddenly, here he was, like a ghost risen from the grave. Changed? What a goddamn joke. I didn't reply. Couldn't. What was there to say? Every word I could conjure felt inadequate. A pathetic attempt to convey the years of pain and anger he'd inflicted. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. The message pulsed in my mind, a constant irritating hum. Why now? After all this time, why did he suddenly want to reconnect? Was it guilt? Remorse? Doubtful. Gavin had never been capable of either. Then the gnawing started. Curiosity. A dark, twisted curiosity that whispered insidious possibilities. What did he want? Was this some pathetic attempt at redemption? A desperate plea for forgiveness he didn't deserve? Or was it something more sinister, something calculated and cruel? Against my better judgment, against every fiber of my being screaming at me to run, I texted back, "Why now?" The response came almost instantly, another jolt to my system. Been keeping up with your career. Proud of you, kid. Proud. He had the audacity to be proud? He hadn't earned the right to feel pride, to claim any part of my success. This was all me, carved out of the wreckage he'd left behind. Rage simmered beneath my skin, a familiar burn. I wanted to lash out, to unleash the years of pent-up fury in a torrent of insults and accusations, but something held me back. A sliver of hope, maybe. Or perhaps just a desperate need for closure. I almost left it at that, deleting the conversation and trying to block him out again. But the idea of getting to confront him, to look him in the eye and finally tell him what he had done to me and my mom, it was too tempting. I needed that. So I agreed to meet. The coffee shop was a trendy place downtown, bustling with the morning rush. I got there early, grabbed a seat in the corner where I could see the entrance. I was a mess of nerves, a tangled knot of anticipation and dread. I didn't know what I was expecting. An older, weaker version of the man I remembered? Someone humbled by time and regret? But when he walked in, it was like a punch to the gut. He hadn't changed. The same confident stride, the same self-assured smirk playing on his lips. He looked like he hadn't aged a day. It was infuriating. His eyes scanned the room and then locked onto mine. A smile spread across his face, a familiar, unsettlingly warm smile. Like we were old friends catching up. "There's my guy," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Look at you, all grown up, successful." I didn't smile. Couldn't. The sight of him, the sound of his voice, it dredged up too much. It ripped open old wounds I thought had finally healed. "Why now, Gavin?" I asked, my voice tight, betraying the tremor of suppressed emotion. He waved it off like it was nothing, settling into the chair across from me. Been thinking about family, about keeping the people that matter close. The way he said keeping the family close sent a chill down my spine. It didn't sound like a suggestion or even a sentiment. It sounded like a warning. For the next 20 minutes, he acted like the past had never happened. Asked about my job, my girlfriend, my apartment. Cracked a few jokes like we were bonding. He was trying to charm me, to lull me into a false sense of security. Then, he got to the real reason he was here. It's funny, how life has a way of circling back, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. Now that we're back in touch, I was hoping we could help each other out. There it was. The other shoe dropping. I leaned back in my chair, my senses on high alert. I didn't say anything, just let him talk. He started hinting, not saying it outright, but nudging me toward something. He didn't need help, exactly. But wouldn't it be great if we could support each other now that we were reconnecting? I knew what that meant. He wanted something from me, something that leveraged my skills, my position, something shady. I let him finish his coffee, watched him carefully. He was a master manipulator. I knew that better than anyone. But this time, I wouldn't be a pawn in his game. I have to go, I said, standing up abruptly. He stood too, clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt both familiar and repulsive. We'll talk soon, he said, his eyes gleaming with a knowing light. Then, he walked out, disappearing into the busy street. I sat there for a long time, staring at my untouched coffee. The taste of dread was bitter on my tongue. Something about the way he said keeping the family close stuck with me. It felt like a threat, a promise of things to come. I had a gut feeling that this was just the beginning, and I wasn't wrong. I barely made it 2 blocks from the coffee shop before I realized I wasn't alone. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. Gavin had always had a way of getting under my skin, making me question my own sanity. But the feeling persisted, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I slowed my pace, trying to appear casual, and glanced around. The street was crowded with pedestrians, a chaotic mix of hurried footsteps and muffled conversations. Nothing immediately stood out, but as I waited for the light to change at the crosswalk, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a reflection in a storefront window. Someone was following me. My heart kicked into overdrive, adrenaline flooding my system. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see without making it obvious. A man, early 40s maybe, stocky build, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't Gavin, but something about him set off alarms in my head. The way he held himself, the way his eyes seemed to scan the crowd but always returned to me. He was keeping the exact same pace as me, always staying a few steps behind. Too deliberate to be a coincidence. The light changed. I crossed the street, picking up my pace. So did he. My pulse spiked. I wasn't about to lead this guy back to my apartment. I took a sharp right into an alley between 2 buildings, moving fast. The alley was narrow, dimly lit, and reeked of stale garbage. I ducked behind a dumpster, pressing my back against the cold brick wall. I forced myself to breathe quietly, trying to control the pounding in my chest. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the distant hum of city traffic. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I clenched my fists, adrenaline surging. This wasn't some random mugging. This was Gavin. This was his way of showing me he was in control, that he could reach me anytime, anywhere. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, cold, devoid of emotion. You're making things harder than they need to be, Jason. I stiffened. It wasn't Gavin, but the way he spoke, the smug, knowing tone. It made my skin crawl. It was like Gavin's voice filtered through someone else, twisted and amplified. You're wasting time fighting him, the man continued. He just wants to help. Help? Is that what we were calling it now? The deliberate destruction of my life was help? The lie caught in my throat, a bitter, suffocating taste. Silence. Then a low chuckle. You're smart, Jason. So why make this a fight you can't win? I felt my nails dig into my palms, drawing blood. The rage was building, a white-hot fury threatening to consume me. I wanted to burst out of my hiding place, confront him, demand answers. But I knew that's exactly what Gavin wanted. "I don't know who the hell you are," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But tell Gavin that if he thinks I'm rolling over, he's in for a surprise." More silence. The man was weighing his options, calculating. Then, just before he turned to leave, he spoke again. "Good luck." The way he said it, it wasn't a wish. It was a threat. It sent a chill down my spine, a premonition of something terrible to come. I stayed behind the dumpster until I heard his footsteps fade completely. Then, slowly, cautiously, I peeked out. The alley was empty. I exhaled sharply, my hands still shaking. Gavin hadn't just come back into my life. He had brought backup. He had declared war, and I was his target. A week crawled by, each day heavier than the last. The unease from the alley encounter festered, a constant reminder of the shadow lurking just out of sight. I tried to focus on work, to bury myself in the familiar patterns of code and security protocols, but Gavin's presence permeated everything. I started noticing him creeping into my life in ways I hadn't expected. It started with a visit to my office. I was at my desk, reviewing security logs late one afternoon, when I caught movement near the front entrance. My office had glass walls, a design choice I now bitterly regretted. I could see through to the reception area, and there he was. Gavin! He was leaning against the desk, talking to the receptionist, flashing that same charming smile he had always used to get his way. I saw her polite expression shift to something more uncomfortable as he pointed toward my office. My stomach tightened. He was escalating, becoming bolder. He was invading my space, my sanctuary. Before I could react, he was inside. "There he is," he said loudly, arms open wide like this was some happy reunion. Heads turned. My coworkers looked up, confused. I stiffened in my chair, every muscle in my body tensed. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice level, trying to mask the fury churning inside me. "I was in the area," Gavin said, his voice just loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Thought I'd drop by and see how my stepson is doing." That word, stepson, it twisted the knife. He had never adopted me, never been a real father figure. He had barely been a presence in my life, and now he was throwing that out there like it meant something. I pushed back from my desk, standing up. "You can't just show up here." "Relax," he said, waving me off dismissively. "I'm just saying hi." But that wasn't all he was doing. He started introducing himself to my coworkers, shaking hands, making small talk. He told them how proud he was of me, how he always knew I'd do well in life. It was all an act, carefully rehearsed, designed to make it seem like he had always been a supportive father figure. Then, he turned back to me, his voice casual but laced with something else, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "You work too hard, Jason," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Must be exhausting, keeping up with everything." I clenched my jaw. He was planting seeds, making it sound like I was overwhelmed, like I was struggling. I saw the receptionist glance at me, uncertain. My boss, Martin, passed by and shot me a curious look. Gavin patted my shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "Just looking out for you, son." And with that, he strolled out, leaving behind a room full of people who now had doubts about me, who saw me as something less than the competent, reliable employee I had always been. That night, my girlfriend, Lena, called me while she was out running errands. She sounded irritated. "You won't believe who I ran into," she said. I already knew. "Gavin." "Yeah," she said, sighing. "At the cafe down the street." He acted all surprised to see me, but I could tell he wasn't. He started talking about you, about how you've always had commitment issues. I gripped my phone, my knuckles white. "What exactly did he say?" She exhaled. "He brought up some ex from college, saying you never knew what you wanted back then. Said he hoped you'd finally grown out of it." I exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. This was Gavin's specialty, eroding trust, planting seeds of doubt. Lena, you know he's doing this on purpose, right? Yeah, I do, she said, but I could hear the tension in her voice. It's just, he's good at making things sound true. That was Gavin's power. He never outright lied. He twisted the truth, weaponized it, used it to manipulate and control. A few days later, I got a message from an old friend, Matt, someone I hadn't talked to in years. Hey man, just wanted to check in. Gavin reached out, said he was worried about you. Everything okay? I stared at the message, my mind reeling. Gavin was spreading his version of things, rewriting the narrative. And it wasn't just Matt. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from family members, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in ages, a cousin who had drifted away over time, an old college roommate. The conversations always started the same. Hey, I heard from Gavin. He says he's trying to make amends. Why are you shutting him out? It was like he was rebuilding the bridges he had burned, but only in a way that made me look like the problem, the stubborn, ungrateful son refusing to forgive. The worst was my Uncle Pete. He had always been on my side, the only one who saw through Gavin back then. When I called him, his voice was different, more distant. I don't know, Jason, he said, his voice hesitant. He just seems like he really wants to fix things. He's manipulating you, Pete, I said flatly. Maybe, Pete admitted, but maybe you're being stubborn. Maybe it's time to move on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Gavin had found a way to wedge even my uncle into a position of doubt. And then, things got worse. I noticed strange charges on my bank account. Small purchases, gas stations, convenience stores, places I hadn't been to in years. At first, I thought it was a minor case of fraud. Maybe my card got skimmed. But then I saw the pattern. These were places I used to go when Gavin was around, habits I had back then. He had access to my information somehow. I changed all my passwords, locked down my accounts, put alerts on everything. And then I got the email. It was from Gavin. Jason, I'm just looking out for you. Be careful with your finances. Mistakes can be costly. Let's talk soon. My stomach twisted. He knew. Somehow he had found a way into my financial records. He was showing me that he was watching, that he was in control. That's when I realized this wasn't just about reconnecting. It wasn't even about money. It was about power. He was slipping into my life from every angle, my job, my girlfriend, my friends, my family, my bank account. He was closing in, piece by piece, making me feel like I had nowhere to turn. I sat there staring at the email, gripping the arms of my chair, the rage building to a boiling point. I knew what was coming next. This was just the beginning. The situation escalated faster than I could have imagined. A week after the email, my boss, Martin, called me into his office again. The moment I stepped inside, I could tell something was off. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, looking at me like I was suddenly a problem, a liability. He wasn't sure how to handle. Jason, close the door, he said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. I did, and sat down, waiting, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew this wasn't going to be good. Martin cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. We got an interesting call the other day, he said, his voice hesitant. From a man named Gavin. Says he's your stepfather. I felt my jaw tighten. He wasn't my stepfather. Never had been, never would be. He's not my stepfather, I corrected. My voice clipped. Martin exhaled, running a hand through his thinning hair. Well, whatever he is, he seemed very concerned. Mentioned you might be overwhelmed at work, that you've been acting off lately. My hands clenched into fists beneath the table. This was exactly what Gavin wanted. He wasn't just showing up at my office to plant seeds of doubt. He was actively working behind the scenes to destroy my reputation. I don't know what he told you, I said carefully, keeping my voice controlled. But it's not true. Martin studied me, his expression unreadable. Is there something going on in your personal life that's affecting your performance, Jason? That question pissed me off more than anything. Gavin had gotten to him. It didn't matter how hard I worked, how many late nights I put in, one well-placed lie, and suddenly my boss was questioning my competence. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I'd appreciate it if you didn't entertain calls from someone who isn't part of my life." Martin sighed, leaning forward. "Look, Jason, I don't want to get involved in your family drama, but perception matters. If someone's raising concerns, I have to take them seriously." I wanted to scream. That was the whole point. Gavin didn't need to prove anything, he just needed to make people question me, to create an atmosphere of doubt and suspicion. I left the meeting with a pit in my stomach, the weight of Gavin's manipulation pressing down on me. Over the next few days, I started noticing subtle changes at work. Tasks I normally handled were reassigned to other team members. Meetings I used to lead were now being run by someone else. My coworkers were treating me differently, some with sympathy, others with a cautious hesitation, like they weren't sure whether to trust me anymore. Gavin had succeeded in making me look unstable, unreliable, and I knew it was only going to get worse. Then, Lena started pulling away. She didn't say anything at first, but I noticed the small shifts in her behavior, the way she hesitated before answering my texts, the way our conversations felt more forced, the way she avoided my gaze. She wasn't as affectionate, wasn't as open. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just stress from work, but the tension between us was growing, a silent barrier erected by Gavin's insidious influence. It all boiled over one night when she finally admitted what was on her mind. We were sitting across from each other on the couch, the silence thick and heavy. I need to ask," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. "Is there anything you haven't told me about your past, Jason?" I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" She exhaled slowly, avoiding my eyes. I ran into Gavin again. He brought up something about money problems, how you used to struggle with commitment. She finally looked at me, uncertainty and vulnerability in her eyes. "He made it sound like you have a pattern of pushing people away." My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. He was poisoning her mind, twisting her perceptions, driving a wedge between us. "Lena," I said, my voice tight, pleading, "he's doing this on purpose. He's done this before." She rubbed her forehead, looking distressed. "I know. I want to believe you, but he seems so genuine, so concerned about you." That was the trap. Gavin never came off as outright malicious. He played the role of the worried father figure, the reasonable one, while making me look like the unstable, irrational one. I leaned forward, took her hands in mine, trying to convey the depth of my desperation. "Lena, listen to me. He is not who he says he is. He is controlling, manipulative, and he's been trying to dismantle my life since the moment he showed up again. You cannot trust him." She looked away, her eyes filled with conflict. I need time to think." The next morning, she packed a bag and left. Not forever, not yet. But as I watched her walk out the door, I knew it was only a matter of time. Gavin had planted the seed of doubt, and it was only a matter of time before it bloomed into full-blown destruction. Then, the strangest thing happened. I started getting messages from mutual acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in years. They were checking in, offering words of support, hinting at rumors and concerns they had heard. "Hey man, just wanted to see how you're doing," one message read. "Heard some things, wanted to make sure you're okay." At first, I thought it was random, a strange coincidence. But then I realized what was happening. Gavin was contacting them, one by one, spreading his carefully crafted lies, reinforcing his narrative of concern and my supposed instability. He was going through every person who had ever been part of my life, feeding them the same subtle poison, the same insidious suggestions that I was distant, that I was stressed, that he was trying to help but I was pushing him away. People who once trusted me were now hesitating, questioning. My support network was crumbling around me, brick by brick, under the relentless assault of Gavin's manipulation. Then came the final straw. I got a call from my bank. Mr. Carter, we've detected some unusual activity on your account. Have you recently shared your login details with anyone? My heart started racing, a cold dread washing over me. I already knew the answer. No! What's going on? There have been multiple login attempts from a different location, as well as some small transactions that seem inconsistent with your usual spending habits. I knew it. Gavin. Somehow, he had gotten into my financial records. He had access to my most private information. He was violating my security, my privacy, my very sense of self. I hung up and went into full lockdown mode, changed every password, added security alerts, froze certain accounts. The damage was likely already done. And then, like clockwork, I got a message from him. Jason, you need to be more careful with your finances. If you're struggling, I can help. I stared at the text, my hands shaking with rage. He wanted me to know he was watching. He wanted me to feel violated, exposed, powerless. That's when I knew this wasn't just about reconnecting. It wasn't even about money. This was a game, a sick, twisted game of control, and Gavin was playing for keeps. He was intent on destroying everything I had worked for, reducing me to nothing. But he had made one mistake. He thought I was still the same scared kid he had once manipulated. He had no idea what was coming next. A few days after locking down my accounts and teetering on the edge of a full-blown breakdown, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Danielle. She was a lawyer, a shark in a suit, and the one person I trusted to help me navigate this legal minefield. Danielle, it's Jason. I need your help. Her voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the underlying concern. What's going on, Jason? You sound stressed. Gavin. He's escalated. He's interfering with my job, my relationships, my finances. He even got into my bank account. I rattled off the litany of his offenses, the weight of it threatening to crush me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her mental gears turning, assessing the situation. Okay, she said finally, her voice firm. This is serious. We need to document everything. Every interaction, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. I want emails, texts, phone records, everything. I have some of it, I said, but he's been careful. He never explicitly threatens me. It's all veiled, suggestive. That's fine, Danielle said. We can work with that. We build a case based on the pattern of behavior, the intent, the overall impact on your life. The key is to be proactive. Don't wait for him to make the next move. We anticipate it. That was exactly what I needed to hear. I was tired of reacting, of being constantly on the defensive. I wanted to take the fight to him. What can I do right now? I asked, my voice gaining a renewed sense of purpose. First, cease all contact with him. No calls, no texts, no emails. Let him reach out to you and document every single attempt. Second, get me everything you have. We need to start building our case. And third, prepare yourself. This is going to be a long, messy fight. He won't give up easily. I knew she was right. Gavin was a master manipulator, a relentless predator. He wouldn't back down unless he was forced to. I'm ready, I said, my voice firm. I'm tired of being a victim. It's time to fight back. 2 days after meeting with Danielle, things started to spiral faster than I expected. I thought Gavin would play his games slowly, stretching them out, letting the manipulations sink in over time. But I had underestimated him, or maybe I had backed him into a corner without realizing it. Either way, he escalated fast. It started with my job. 2 days after our last conversation, I got called into Martin's office again. I knew something was off the second I walked in. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. This time, it wasn't just Martin sitting behind his desk. Valerie, one of the higher-ups in HR, was there too, arms folded, her expression unreadable. I shut the door behind me, but didn't sit down. I wasn't in the mood for whatever nonsense was coming next. Jason, Martin started, clearing his throat. We need to have a serious discussion about recent events. I exhaled through my nose, already exhausted. What now? Martin exchanged a glance with Valerie, then sighed. Did you threaten Gavin? I blinked, taken aback. What? Valerie straightened in her chair, her voice smooth and practiced, like this was just another HR issue. He called us this morning, she said. Said you've been harassing him, that he's worried about your mental state. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Of course he did. He was flipping the script, playing the victim, setting me up for a fall. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice carefully controlled, trying to keep the rage from boiling over. He's been harassing me for weeks, interfering in my job, my personal life. And now that I fight back, he's suddenly concerned for my well-being? Martin hesitated, avoiding my gaze. Look, Jason, you've been a valuable employee here, but this situation is getting out of hand. Valerie leaned forward slightly, her eyes cold and calculating. Whether his claims are true or not, we have to take them seriously. We can't have an employee causing disturbances, either at work or outside of it. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. Are you firing me? Martin winced, looking uncomfortable. Not firing, but we're placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. A hollow, angry silence filled the room. I couldn't believe it. After everything I had done for this company, after all the sacrifices I had made, they were siding with him. You're making a mistake, I said coldly, my eyes burning with righteous fury. Martin just sighed, avoiding my gaze. I hope not. I grabbed my things and walked out, my heart pounding not in fear, not even in panic, but in pure, unadulterated rage. I had done nothing wrong. I had worked my ass off for this company, and all it took was one manipulative bastard making a few phone calls to turn them against me. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. By the time I got inside my apartment, I barely made it to the couch before I exploded. I slammed my fists against the coffee table, the sound echoing in the empty room. Gavin had spent weeks tearing my life apart, piece by piece. But this was it. He had taken everything I had spent years building, and he still wasn't done, because when I checked my mail, I found another letter waiting for me. This one wasn't from work. This one was from a law firm. I opened it, skimmed the first few lines, and felt my stomach drop. A cease and desist. From Gavin. I stared at the paper, my mind barely processing the words. He was accusing me of harassment. It was all right there in black and white. Claims that I had repeatedly attempted to contact him in an aggressive manner, that I had made threatening remarks, that he had been forced to take necessary legal precautions for his own safety. It was so insane, so utterly detached from reality. I almost laughed. I hadn't called him. I hadn't texted him. I had barely even responded to his constant interference. But this was his move. He was flipping the script, playing the victim, setting up a legal paper trail so that if I did retaliate, it would look like he had been right all along. I picked up the phone and called Danielle, my hands shaking with a mixture of fury and determination. She answered on the second ring. Jason? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. He's accusing me of harassment. She sighed, like she had been expecting this. Did he file a restraining order? Not yet. Just a cease and desist. Then he's setting up a case. She said bluntly. He's trying to establish a history. If you react, if you call him, text him, anything, he can claim you're violating this order. He'll push for legal action next. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to control the raging storm inside me. So what do I do? Just let him keep destroying my life? For now, nothing, she said. I gritted my teeth, frustration boiling over. That's not good enough. Danielle was silent for a beat, letting me vent. I get it, I do. But Gavin wants you to react. That's how manipulators work. He's making you feel cornered so you'll lash out, and then he wins. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm, to think strategically. So what do I do? Just let him win? No, she said, her voice regaining its strength. We fight this differently. We go after him legally. We build our own case. That got my attention. I sat up straighter, a glimmer of hope flickering in the darkness. How? Documentation? Everything you have, emails, texts, phone records, bank statements. I want a timeline of every single time he interfered in your life. We need proof that he's the one harassing you. That I could do. After we hung up, I went straight to my desk and started compiling everything. I went through old emails, bank records, text messages. I wrote out a timeline from the moment Gavin first contacted me to now, detailing every instance of manipulation, every act of interference. And then I went deeper. I started digging. If Gavin had done this to me, chances were he had done it to others. And I was going to find out everything. It took hours, fueled by adrenaline and righteous anger. I scoured the internet, searching Gavin's name, his old businesses, his past connections. I sifted through court records, financial reports, news articles, and then I found something. A debt dispute from years ago, failed business ventures, shady financial dealings, and then one article from a local news site 5 years ago caught my eye. Business owner accused of financial misconduct, but case dropped due to lack of evidence. I clicked on it, my heart pounding. The details were vague, but the accusations were almost identical to what he was doing to me. A former business partner had accused him of fraud, coercion, and financial exploitation, but the case never went to trial. No one had enough proof. Until now. I printed the article, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't use this directly, but it was a starting point. It was confirmation that Gavin had a history, a pattern of behavior. I sat back, staring at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. Gavin thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought he had won. He had no idea I was about to burn the whole damn house down. The next few days were a frenzy of research and preparation. I barely slept, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to expose Gavin for the manipulative con artist he was. Danielle had emphasized the importance of a solid foundation, and I was determined to provide it. The news article was my starting point. I tracked down the reporter who had written it, a woman named Sarah Miller. It took some digging, but I finally found her contact information. Hesitantly, the first sent her an email, explaining my situation and asking if she could provide any additional information about the case she had covered years ago. To my surprise, she responded quickly. "Mr. Carter," she wrote. "I remember that case well. It was frustrating. The evidence was there, but we couldn't quite connect the dots. I'm willing to talk. Call me." Her willingness to help was like a shot of adrenaline. I picked up the phone immediately. Sarah's voice was weary but sharp. She remembered the case vividly, the frustration of seeing Gavin slip through the cracks. He was good, she said, her voice laced with bitterness. Charming, persuasive. He knew how to manipulate the system, how to bury the evidence. We had witnesses, documents, but nothing that definitively proved his guilt. What happened to his business partner, the one who accused him? I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. He lost everything, Sarah said, her voice somber. His reputation, his business, his savings. The stress of the lawsuit took a toll on his health. He ended up moving out of state, starting over from scratch. I don't know where he is now. Do you have his name? I asked, my heart pounding. I do, Sarah said. His name was David Miller. No relation, David Miller. I wrote the name down, my mind already racing. Finding him was my next priority. He was the key, the one person who could provide first-hand testimony of Gavin's manipulative tactics. I spent hours scouring online databases, social media platforms, anything that could give me a lead. It was like searching for a ghost. The David Miller I found were too numerous to count, and none seemed to fit the description Sarah had given me. Just when I was about to give up, I found a small, obscure online forum for entrepreneurs who had been victims of fraud. And there, buried deep in a thread about shady business practices, was a post from a user named DavidMem72 describing a strikingly similar experience to the one Sarah had told me. The post was vague, but the details were undeniable. The same manipulative tactics, the same financial exploitation, the same pattern of deceit. I sent a private message to the user, identifying myself and explaining my situation. Hours turned into an agonizing wait. I refreshed the page every few minutes, my anxiety building with each passing moment. Finally, a response. I know who Gavin is. I've been trying to forget him for years. It was David Miller. The conversation that followed was a revelation. David confirmed everything Sarah had told me, providing a detailed account of Gavin's fraudulent schemes, his manipulative tactics, his relentless pursuit of power and control. He had been terrified to come forward, fearing Gavin's retaliation. But now, knowing that I was fighting back, he was willing to help, to share his story, to provide the evidence he had been holding on to for years. I have documents, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Contracts, emails, bank records. I kept everything, hoping that one day someone would bring him to justice. I need those documents, David, I said, my voice filled with urgency. They could be the key to stopping him. I'll send them to you, he said. But be careful, Jason. Gavin is dangerous. He won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in his way. The next day, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside were hundreds of pages of documents, meticulously organized and labeled, contracts riddled with loopholes, emails filled with subtle threats and veiled manipulations, bank records revealing a complex web of fraudulent transactions. It was everything I needed. Proof of Gavin's pattern of deceit, his willingness to exploit and destroy anyone who stood in his way. I spent the next few days poring over the documents, meticulously piecing together the evidence. It was a grueling process, but with each new discovery, my determination grew stronger. I also started reaching out to other people Gavin had wronged, former employees, investors, business partners. Most were reluctant to talk, fearing retaliation. But a few, emboldened by David's courage, agreed to share their stories, adding even more weight to the evidence I was compiling. I was building a mountain of proof, a case so compelling, so undeniable, that even Gavin couldn't escape. I contacted Danielle, sharing my findings. She was impressed, but cautioned me against complacency. "This is good, Jason," she said, her voice serious. "But it's not enough. We need to anticipate his next move. He won't let this go unanswered." I knew she was right. Gavin was a cornered animal, and he would lash out in desperation. That's when the harassment started again. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. Strange noises outside my apartment. Suspicious cars parked on my street. I knew it was Gavin, sending a message, trying to intimidate me, to make me back down. But I wouldn't. I was too close. I had seen the darkness inside him, the ruthlessness, the lack of empathy, and I was determined to expose him, to prevent him from hurting anyone else. I installed security cameras, changed my locks, and started carrying a weapon for self-defense. I was prepared for whatever Gavin threw at me. The chess pieces were set. The game was about to begin. The harassment continued, each incident escalating in intensity. One morning, I woke up to find my car tires slashed. Another night, someone threw a brick through my apartment window. I reported everything to the police, but they were unable to make any arrests. Gavin was careful, always operating just outside the reach of the law, but I refused to be intimidated. I was too close to victory. Danielle filed a lawsuit against Gavin, accusing him of defamation, harassment, and financial misconduct. The lawsuit included all the evidence I had compiled, the documents from David Miller, The testimonies from other victims, the police reports detailing the harassment. The media picked up the story, and suddenly Gavin was in the spotlight. The charming, successful businessman was now exposed as a manipulative con artist, a predator who had ruined countless lives. The pressure was mounting. Gavin's carefully constructed facade was crumbling around him. He retaliated, filing a countersuit against me, accusing me of stalking, defamation, and emotional distress. He claimed that I was obsessed with him, that I had been harassing him for years, that I was trying to ruin his life out of spite. It was all lies, of course, but Gavin was skilled at twisting the truth, at manipulating public perception. The media frenzy intensified. I was bombarded with interview requests, inquiries from journalists eager to get my side of the story. Danielle advised me to stay silent, to let the evidence speak for itself. But I couldn't. I needed to tell my story, to expose Gavin's lies, to show the world the man behind the mask. I agreed to do one interview, a televised sit-down with a respected investigative journalist. I spent hours preparing, rehearsing my talking points, anticipating Gavin's counterarguments. When the day finally arrived, I was a nervous wreck. The studio lights were blinding, the cameras intimidating. But as I began to speak, to recount my experiences, to share the evidence I had gathered, a sense of calm washed over me. I told the truth, the unvarnished, brutal truth. I described Gavin's manipulative tactics, his financial schemes, his relentless pursuit of power and control. I talked about the pain and suffering he had inflicted on me and countless others. The interview was powerful, emotional, and devastatingly effective. The public was outraged. Support for Gavin plummeted. He tried to defend himself, issuing a statement denying all the allegations, but no one believed him. The evidence was too overwhelming, the testimonies too compelling. The walls were closing in. Then came the final blow. One of Gavin's former associates, a man who had been involved in his fraudulent schemes, decided to cooperate with the authorities. He provided them with even more evidence, including secret recordings, hidden financial records, and incriminating emails. Gavin was indicted on multiple charges, including fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The evidence was so overwhelming that he had no choice but to plead guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The relief was immense. A weight lifted from my shoulders that I had been carrying for years. I had finally defeated Gavin, exposed him for the monster he was, and brought him to justice. But the victory was bittersweet. The damage he had done could never be fully undone. My relationships were strained, my career was in shambles, and the scars from his manipulation would always be there. But I was alive. I was free, and I was determined to rebuild my life, to find happiness and fulfillment despite the pain of the past. I started therapy, working through the trauma and learning to trust again. I reconnected with old friends, patching up broken relationships, and forging new bonds. And then I met someone, a woman named Sarah, who saw me for who I was, flaws and all, and loved me anyway. She was kind, compassionate, and fiercely independent. She helped me heal, to find joy in the present, and to look forward to the future with hope and optimism. The past would always be a part of me, a reminder of the darkness I had overcome, but it would no longer define me. I had learned that even in the face of unimaginable pain, it was possible to find strength, to find resilience, to find love, and that was a victory worth fighting for. The game was over. Checkmate.